The steam whistle screamed across the Arizona desert as Austin O'Brien threw himself onto the railroad tracks, arms spread wide and boots planted firm against the wooden ties, knowing full well that stopping the westbound locomotive barreling toward Superior could cost him his life. The engineer saw him standing there, a lone figure in worn denim and a dusty Stetson, and began pulling the brake lever with all his might. Metal shrieked against metal, sparks flew from the wheels, and passengers lurched forward in their seats as the massive iron beast shuddered and groaned, fighting against its own momentum. Austin stood his ground, heart hammering against his ribs, sweat trickling down his spine despite the November chill of 1882. The locomotive came to a stop mere feet from where he stood, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from its massive boiler. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" the engineer shouted from his perch, face purple with rage and probably a fair amount of fear. "I could have killed you. I could have killed everyone on this train." Austin stepped around to the side of the locomotive, his spurs jangling with each purposeful stride. "I need to get someone off this train. It's a matter of life and death." "Whose death?" "Yours, because that's what nearly happened." The conductor had joined the engineer now, equally furious, waving his pocket watch as though the time lost was more valuable than the explanation Austin owed them. "There's a woman on this train. Hannah Garrett. She's making a terrible mistake, and I can't let her go through with it." Austin's voice carried across the desert air, strong and certain despite the way his hands trembled at his sides. The conductor sputtered. "You stopped an entire locomotive, endangered dozens of lives, disrupted the railroad schedule, and probably broke several laws, all for some woman." "Not some woman," Austin said, and his voice caught in his throat in a way that made even the angry engineer pause. "The only woman who ever mattered." Inside the passenger car, Hannah Garrett had been thrown forward against the seat in front of her when the train made its emergency stop. Her traveling hat had gone askew, and her carefully packed trunk had shifted in the overhead compartment. She straightened herself, smoothing down the burgundy traveling dress she'd spent her last good money on, trying to look composed and dignified for her arrival in California. Around her, other passengers were murmuring in confusion and concern, craning their necks to see what had caused the sudden stop. "Probably cattle on the tracks," said an older woman across the aisle. "Or bandits," suggested a man in a business suit, his hand moving instinctively to his vest pocket where Hannah suspected he kept a Derringer. Hannah didn't participate in the speculation. She was too busy trying to keep her heart from cracking completely in two. Leaving Superior had been the hardest decision of her life, but staying would have been harder. Staying meant watching Austin O'Brien court and marry someone else. Staying meant living in the same small town, running into him at the Mercantile, seeing him at church socials, watching him build a life that didn't include her. She couldn't do it. She wouldn't survive it. So when her aunt in San Francisco had written offering her a position as a companion and secretary, Hannah had accepted without hesitation. It was a good opportunity, a chance to start fresh, to build a life in a real city with culture and prospects. It was sensible. It was practical. It was breaking her heart. The conductor appeared at the front of the passenger car, looking harried and annoyed. "Is there a Miss Hannah Garrett aboard?" Hannah's stomach dropped. Slowly, feeling every eye in the car turned toward her, she raised her hand. "I'm Hannah Garrett." "You need to come with me, miss. Now." "What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" Hannah gathered her skirts and stood, her mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to her family, to her father at the ranch? "No one's hurt, but there's a damn fool cowboy on the tracks who seems to think you're worth dying for. Pardon my language, miss, but this is highly irregular." Hannah's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Austin. He didn't give his first name, just said he needed to speak with Hannah Garrett, and that it couldn't wait. The engineer wants him arrested, and frankly, I'm inclined to agree, but first I need to get him off the tracks so we can proceed. Hannah followed the conductor on shaking legs, aware of every passenger watching her, probably judging her. Respectable women didn't have cowboys stopping trains for them. Respectable women made sensible choices and stuck to their plans. But Hannah had never felt particularly respectable around Austin O'Brien. She'd felt alive. When she stepped down from the train, shielding her eyes against the bright Arizona sun, she saw him standing there beside the massive locomotive, hat in his hands, looking at her with an expression that made her forget how to breathe. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His dark hair was disheveled, his jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and his blue eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Hannah," he said, and just the way he said her name made her want to run to him and away from him in equal measure. "Austin, what are you doing? You could have been killed. You could have gotten other people killed. This is insane." "I know." He took a step toward her and she saw his hands were trembling. "I know it's insane. I know I've got no right to stop you, no claim on you, nothing to offer you that compares to what's waiting in San Francisco. But I had to try. I had to tell you." "Tell me what?" The words came out as barely a whisper. Around them, passengers had crowded to the windows, watching the scene unfold like it was a stage play. The engineer and conductor stood by with crossed arms, waiting. "That I love you. That I've loved you since we were 17 years old, and you punched Billy Morrison in the mouth for saying your brother was a coward. That I've loved you through every dance we never had, every conversation that ended too soon, every time I watched you walk away and wanted to call you back." Austin moved closer, close enough that she could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "That I'd stop the world for you if I could, but since I can't do that, I stopped this train." Hannah felt tears prickling at her eyes, hot and unwelcome. "You never said anything. For 5 years, Austin, you never said a single word. I know. God help me, I know, and I'll regret that cowardice for the rest of my life." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from all the times she'd watched him struggle with difficult words. "I thought I wasn't good enough. Your father has the biggest spread in the county, and I'm just a ranch hand with a horse and a saddle to my name. I thought you deserved better than what I could give you. So what changed?" Hannah asked, and she was angry now, angry at him for waiting until she was literally leaving town to tell her this, angry at herself for the hope blooming in her chest despite everything. "What made you suddenly decide to risk your life and stop a train? My father died 3 weeks ago." The anger drained out of Hannah like water from a broken vessel. "Austin, I'm so sorry. I heard he was sick, but I didn't know. He called me to his bedside the night before he passed. Told me he'd wasted his whole life being afraid. Afraid to take risks, afraid to go after what he really wanted, afraid to live. He worked for the same ranch for 40 years, saved his money, played it safe, and died with nothing but regrets." Austin's voice cracked. "He made me promise I wouldn't make the same mistake. He said if there was something I wanted, someone I loved, I should go after it with everything I had. Life's too short for fear." "But you're still just a ranch hand," Hannah said, hating herself for the words even as she spoke them. "Nothing has changed about your circumstances." "Everything has changed. My father left me $2,000. He'd been saving it his whole life, never told anyone about it. It's enough to buy a small piece of land, enough to start building something. I handed in my notice at the ranch yesterday, and I've got my eye on a property about 10 miles outside Superior. It's not much, Just 160 acres with a creek running through it, but it's got good grazing and a decent spot for a house. He took another step closer. I can't offer you what your aunt in San Francisco can. I can't give you a big city or fancy society or culture, but I can give you a life built on love. I can give you every sunrise and every sunset. I can give you honesty and loyalty and every piece of my heart. Hannah's tears were falling freely now, tracking through the dust on her cheeks. You're asking me to give up everything, to throw away this opportunity. No. Austin reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I'm asking you to choose. Maybe San Francisco is what you really want, and if it is, I'll step aside. I'll apologize to the engineer and the conductor and everyone on this train, and I'll watch you go, and I'll live with it. But if there's even a chance that what you want is here with me, then I had to tell you. I had to give you the choice with all the information. The conductor cleared his throat loudly. Miss, I hate to rush you, but we have a schedule to keep. If you're getting back on this train, it needs to be now. Hannah looked at the train, massive and powerful, ready to carry her away to a new life. Then she looked at Austin, standing before her with his heart in his hands, offering her everything he had. The choice should have been difficult. She'd been planning this move for months, had said her goodbyes, packed her life into a trunk. But when she looked into Austin's eyes, the choice was the easiest thing in the world. My trunk, she said. It's in the overhead compartment, the brown leather one with my initials on it. Austin's face transformed, hope dawning like sunrise. You're staying. I'm staying. Hannah felt a laugh bubble up through her tears. You stopped a train for me, Austin O'Brien. The least I can do is see where this goes. He let out a whoop that probably carried all the way back to Superior, swept her up in his arms, and spun her around right there beside the railroad tracks. When he set her down, his hands came up to cup her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. Can I kiss you? I've been wanting to kiss you for 5 years, but I want to do this right. If you don't kiss me right now, I might change my mind and get back on that train, Hannah said. And then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and certain, and she forgot about San Francisco, forgot about the passengers watching from the windows, forgot about everything except the way Austin O'Brien kissed her like she was precious and necessary and his. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the conductor was retrieving her trunk with very poor grace, muttering about fool cowboys and foolish women and the railroad's deteriorating schedule. The engineer was still furious, but there was something that might have been grudging respect in his eyes as he prepared to get the locomotive moving again. You're both crazy, the conductor said, handing Austin the trunk. This is the most ridiculous thing I've seen in 20 years of railroad work. Probably, Austin agreed, grinning like a man who just won the lottery. But I'm crazy and happy, which beats sensible and miserable. They stood together, hands linked, and watched the train pull away, carrying with it the life Hannah had planned and leaving in its place something unknown and terrifying and wonderful. When the last car disappeared around the bend, and the sound of the whistle faded into the desert air, Austin turned to her with sudden uncertainty in his eyes. I've got my horse tied up about a quarter-mile back. It's a long walk into town with this trunk, and it's going to be dark soon. We should probably head to your father's ranch, let him know you're not going to California after all. Hannah winced. Oh God, my father, he's going to shoot you. Probably, Austin said cheerfully, but I stopped a train for you. I can face down your father. The walk back to where Austin had left his horse was hot and dusty, with Austin carrying the trunk on his shoulder and Hannah gathering her skirts to keep them from dragging in the dirt. They talked the whole way, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. Austin told her about his father's last days. about the conversations they'd had, about finally understanding that fear was a choice you made every day. Hannah told him about the loneliness of the past few months, about how she'd taken the job in San Francisco not because she wanted to go, but because she couldn't bear to stay. "When did you know?" Austin asked as they approached his horse, a sturdy bay gelding who regarded them with patient eyes. "That you had feelings for me, I mean." Hannah thought back. "Do you remember the harvest dance 3 years ago? You were talking to Sarah Mitchell, and she was laughing at something you said, and I felt like I'd been kicked in the chest by a mule. I went home early, told everyone I had a headache." She laughed, but it was tinged with sadness. "I spent the next 6 months trying to convince myself I didn't care, that we were just friends. Obviously, that didn't work." "Sarah Mitchell." Austin looked genuinely confused. "She was asking me about her brother's horse. He'd gone lame, and she wanted advice on treatment. That was the whole conversation." "I know that now. I asked her about it 2 years later when I'd finally gotten past being jealous enough to have a normal conversation with her." Hannah shook her head at her younger self's foolishness. "What about you? When did you know?" Austin secured the trunk behind his saddle before answering. "The day you punched Billy Morrison. We were 17, I know. You had a black eye for a week where he hit you back, and your father was furious, but you didn't care. You stood up for your brother when he couldn't stand up for himself, and I thought, that's the bravest person I've ever met." He helped her up onto the horse, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her waist to take the reins. "I've been yours since that day, Hannah. I just didn't have the courage to tell you until I was about to lose you." The ride to the Garrett ranch took about an hour, with the sun sinking lower toward the horizon and painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Hannah leaned back against Austin's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, still hardly believing this was happening. This morning she'd woken up resigned to leaving everything behind. Now she was riding across the Arizona desert in the arms of the man she loved, heading toward a future she'd never let herself imagine. "Are you scared?" Austin asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "Terrified," Hannah admitted, "but in a good way, I think. Like standing on the edge of something big. We don't have to rush anything. I know I stopped a train and made this grand declaration, but we can take this slow. Court properly, let your father get used to the idea, give you time to be sure." Hannah turned her head to look at him. "Austin, I just gave up a job in San Francisco and a new life in the city. I think we're past taking things slow." He grinned at that, quick and boyish, and kissed her temple. "Fair point." The Garrett Ranch came into view as the sun touched the horizon. A sprawling property with a well-maintained house, several outbuildings and corrals filled with horses. Hannah's father, Henry Garrett, was a respected man in Superior, known for his fair dealings and his excellent horses. He was also known for being protective of his only daughter, which was why Austin's hands tightened nervously on the reins as they approached. Henry was standing on the porch, probably drawn by the sound of hoofbeats. When he saw Hannah on the horse with Austin, his face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, relief, and then a kind of resigned understanding. "Hannah Rose Garrett," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "You were supposed to be halfway to California by now." Hannah slid down from the horse and Austin dismounted behind her, standing close like he was ready to protect her if needed. "There was a change of plans, Papa. I can see that." Henry's eyes moved to Austin, shrewd and assessing. "Austin O'Brien. You want to tell me why my daughter is here with you instead of on that train?" "Yes, sir. I stopped the train, told her I loved her, and asked her to stay." Austin met the older man's gaze steadily. "I know I should have come to you first, asked for permission to court her proper, but I didn't have time. She was leaving and I couldn't let her go without telling her the truth. Henry was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed long and deep. "You stopped the train." "Yes, sir. The actual train, the locomotive. Yes, sir. Are you aware that's probably illegal, not to mention dangerous and incredibly stupid?" "Yes, sir, I am aware." Henry looked at his daughter. "And you came back with him anyway?" Hannah lifted her chin, a gesture her father would recognize as stubbornness. "I did. I love him, Papa. I've loved him for years, and I was only going to San Francisco because I thought he didn't feel the same way. Now that I know he does, I'm not going anywhere." "You gave up a good position, a chance at a different life." "I chose this life, my life here with Austin." Hannah reached back and took Austin's hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know it's sudden. I know it's not what you planned for me, but it's what I want." Henry stepped down from the porch, walked over to where they stood, and looked Austin up and down. "Your father was a good man, worked hard, kept his word. I assume you're cut from the same cloth I try to be, sir. And you've got plans, ways to support a wife." "Because I didn't raise my daughter to struggle and scrape." "Yes, sir. My father left me some money. I'm buying the old Henderson property, the 160 acres along Pinnell Creek. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm good with horses, and I've saved a bit myself over the years." "We won't have luxury, but we won't starve either." Henry nodded slowly. "The Henderson property is good land. Creek never runs dry, even in summer. Good grazing." He was quiet for another moment, then surprised them both by reaching out and shaking Austin's hand. "You've got more courage than sense, boy, stopping that train. But I suppose Hannah needs someone who loves her enough to be that stupid." "Papa." Hannah wasn't sure whether to be offended or relieved. "I mean it as a compliment," Henry said, but there was a smile tugging at his lips now. "You two come inside. Your mother's going to have plenty to say about this, Hannah, and we need to discuss practical matters, like whether the railroad plans to press charges against your young man here." Over dinner, with Hannah's mother fussing over her and alternating between relief that she hadn't left and concern about the propriety of the whole situation, they worked out the details. Austin would court Hannah properly for the next 3 months. He'd visit the ranch twice a week for supper, attend church with the family on Sundays, and generally conduct himself like a gentleman. In the meantime, he'd work on getting his land ready, building a house fit for a wife. 3 months isn't very long, Hannah's mother, Margaret, said worriedly. "Engagements are usually at least a year." "Mother, he stopped a train for me. I think we can manage a shorter engagement." "That's going to be the talk of the territory for years," Margaret said, but there was fondness in her voice. "My daughter, the woman worth stopping a train for." Austin stayed for several hours, sitting in the Garrett parlor and answering Henry's questions about his plans, his finances, his prospects. He was honest about everything: the modest amount of money he had, the hard work ahead of them, the uncertainty of starting a ranch from scratch. Henry seemed to respect the honesty, even if he wasn't entirely thrilled about his daughter marrying a man who'd have to build everything from the ground up. When Austin finally left, well after dark, Hannah walked him out to his horse. The November night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "That went better than I expected," Austin said, pulling Hannah close. "I thought your father might actually shoot me. He considered it. I could tell." Hannah rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. 3 months feels like forever. It'll go fast. I've got a lot of work to do getting that land ready." He tilted her chin up, kissed her softly. "But I'll be here Tuesday for dinner, and I'll see you Sunday at church, and every minute in between I'll be thinking about you. That's going to make it very hard to concentrate on building your house." He laughed, the sound warm in the darkness. "Probably. but I've got motivation now. The sooner I get that house built, the sooner I can marry you." After Austin rode away, Hannah went back inside to find her mother waiting with tea and questions. They sat up late into the night, talking about everything: the wedding, the house, the life Hannah would have as a rancher's wife. It was different from what Margaret had imagined for her daughter, but she could see the happiness in Hannah's eyes, the certainty that hadn't been there before. "You love him enough?" Margaret asked finally. "Enough to make this life work, because it won't be easy, Hannah. Starting a ranch from nothing, that's hard, backbreaking work. There will be lean years, times when you wonder if you made the right choice." "I love him enough," Hannah said without hesitation. "I love him enough to build something from nothing. I love him enough to face whatever comes." The next 3 months were a whirlwind of activity. Austin threw himself into preparing his land, working from sunup to sundown, clearing brush, laying out where the house and barn would go, digging a well. He hired help when he could afford it, called in favors from friends, and worked himself to exhaustion most days. But every Tuesday and Sunday he cleaned up, put on his best clothes, and rode to the Garrett ranch to see Hannah. Those visits became the highlights of Hannah's week. They'd sit on the porch, properly chaperoned by her mother, and talk about everything and nothing. Austin would tell her about the progress on the house, about his plans for the ranch, about the future he was building for them. Hannah would tell him about the preparations for the wedding, about the things she was learning about running a household, about the life she was preparing to share with him. "The house will be small," Austin warned her one Tuesday in December, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee to ward off the winter chill. "Just 2 rooms to start, the main room with the kitchen and a bedroom, but I'll add on as we can afford it. More rooms, a proper parlor, maybe a porch that wraps around. I don't need a big house, Austin. I just need you in it." He smiled at that, reached over to take her hand despite her mother's watchful eye. "You're going to be the most beautiful bride Arizona has ever seen." "You're biased." "Absolutely. But that doesn't make it less true." By Christmas, the basic structure of the house was up. Sturdy wooden frame, roof that wouldn't leak, windows that closed properly against the winter cold. Austin spent his Christmas day at the Garrett Ranch, exchanging modest gifts and eating Margaret's famous roast. He gave Hannah a simple necklace, a silver locket that had belonged to his mother, and she gave him a watch chain she'd braided herself from horsehair, every strand chosen from her father's best horses. "So you'll think of me every time you check the time," she said as she fastened it to his pocket watch. "I think of you every minute anyway," he replied, earning an approving smile from Margaret and a grunt from Henry. January brought cold winds and occasional snow, unusual for Superior but not unheard of. Austin worked through it, determined to have the house finished by February so they could marry in early March as planned. He built furniture in the evenings, a sturdy table, chairs, a bed frame that he crafted with extra care, knowing Hannah would share it with him. Every piece was made with love, with the future in mind. Hannah spent those months preparing as well. She sewed curtains, embroidered pillowcases, learned her mother's recipes, and tried to prepare herself for the reality of being a rancher's wife. It was different from the life she'd been living, certainly different from what awaited her in San Francisco, but she had no regrets. Every time she thought about that train pulling away, about the life she'd almost had, she felt nothing but relief that she'd made the choice she did. In February, a month before the wedding, the railroad sent a letter. Austin opened it with shaking hands, fearing criminal charges or massive fines. Instead, it was an invoice for the cost of the emergency stop and the delay, $50, a substantial sum but manageable. At the bottom, someone had written in pencil, "Next time, just send a telegram. cheaper and less likely to get you killed. $50 to stop a train for you, Austin said, showing Hannah the letter. Worth every penny. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in March at the small church in Superior where the Garrett family had worshipped for years. Hannah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, with the silver locket Austin had given her at her throat. Austin wore a new suit, the first one he'd ever owned, and stood at the altar looking like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Thompson, who'd known both of them since childhood, spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and hard. When he asked Austin if he'd take Hannah as his wife, Austin's voice rang out clear and certain. I will, for all my days. And when Hannah made the same promise, looking into Austin's eyes and seeing her whole future there, she meant it with every fiber of her being. The reception was held at the Garrett Ranch, with half the town in attendance. Everyone wanted to see the couple who'd become local legend, the cowboy who stopped a train and the woman who came back for him. There was dancing and music, food and laughter, and more than a few toasts that referenced the train incident. To Austin, called out one of his former ranch hands, raising a glass. The only man crazy enough to stand on railroad tracks for love, and lucky enough that it worked out. To Hannah, added Sarah Mitchell, grinning, who had the good sense to get off that train and the good taste to choose Austin. As the sun set and the party continued, Austin and Hannah slipped away, riding together toward their new home. The house was small and simple, but Hannah had never seen anything more beautiful. Austin had lit lanterns before they left for the wedding, and warm light glowed from the windows, welcoming them home. He lifted her down from the horse, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at what they'd built together over the past 3 months. Then Austin swept her up in his arms, carried her over the threshold, and kicked the door shut behind them. Welcome home, Mrs. O'Brien, he said, setting her down gently in the middle of their small main room. It's perfect, Hannah said, looking around at the furniture Austin had built, the curtains she'd sewn, the life they were beginning. Everything is perfect. That night, in the bed Austin had crafted with his own hands, they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with patience and tenderness and love. Hannah had been nervous, but Austin was gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms, she felt more certain than ever that she'd made the right choice. No regrets, Austin asked quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. Not a single one. Only that I didn't tell you I loved you 5 years ago. We could have had all that time together. Hannah propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Maybe we needed that time apart to appreciate what we have now. Maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Maybe, but I'm still going to make up for lost time. He pulled her down for a kiss that promised exactly that. The first months of married life were challenging in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. Running a ranch, even a small one, was relentless work. Austin was up before dawn every day, tending to the handful of cattle he'd purchased, mending fences, clearing more land for grazing. Hannah worked just as hard, learning to manage the household on a tight budget, growing vegetables, preserving food for winter, and helping Austin whenever she could. Money was tight, tighter than Hannah had ever experienced. There were times when they ate beans and cornbread for days on end because that was what they could afford. Times when something broke and they had to fix it themselves because hiring help was out of the question. Times when Hannah looked at the small house and the hard life and wondered if she'd been naive to think love was enough. But then Austin would come in from a long day of work, exhausted and dusty, and his face would light up at the sight of her. Or they'd sit together on their small porch in the evening, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. Or he'd pull her into his arms in the middle of the day for no reason except that he loved her and wanted her to know it. And Hannah would remember that she hadn't chosen the easy life. She'd chosen the right life. By their first summer, the ranch was starting to take shape. They had a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden that was actually producing, and enough money saved to think about expanding. Austin had proven to be good at raising horses, just like Hannah's father, and several ranchers had already approached him about buying stock. "We might actually make this work," Austin said one evening, reviewing their finances with a sense of cautious optimism. "If we have a good year next year, we could add that extra room you wanted. Or we could save it," Hannah said practically. "We need a cushion for bad years. When did you become so sensible about money?" "When I married a man who spent $50 stopping a train for me." But she was smiling as she said it, and Austin grinned back. That September, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Austin. When she finally did, sitting him down at their kitchen table after supper, he stared at her in stunned silence for a full minute before sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around the small room. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, like he couldn't quite believe it. "We're actually having a baby. We are, so you need to put me down before you make me dizzy." But Hannah was laughing, crying, overwhelmed with joy and fear in equal measure. Austin became almost comically protective after that. He didn't want Hannah lifting anything heavy, working too hard, or doing anything that might risk the baby. Hannah found it endearing and frustrating in turns, especially when he tried to stop her from doing basic household chores. "Austin, I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been having babies and running households for thousands of years. But you're my wife, carrying my baby, and I'm not taking any chances." They compromised. Hannah would be sensible about her limitations, and Austin would stop acting like she couldn't lift a water bucket. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Hannah's mother visited often, bringing advice and supplies, helping prepare for the baby's arrival. They turned a corner of the bedroom into a nursery area, with a cradle Austin built and blankets Margaret helped Hannah sew. The baby came on a cold night in April 1884, 2 months after their first wedding anniversary. The labor was long and difficult, with Hannah working through the pain while Austin paced outside with Henry, both men useless and anxious. Margaret and the midwife, Mrs. Chen from town, attended Hannah through it all, offering encouragement and expertise. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair, Austin was called in to meet his son. He stood beside the bed, looking down at Hannah, exhausted but glowing, holding their baby, and tears streamed freely down his face. "He's perfect," Austin whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger. "You're both perfect. You want to hold him?" Hannah asked, and carefully transferred the baby to Austin's arms. Austin held his son like he was the most precious thing in the world, which to him he was. "Hey there, little man. I'm your papa. I stopped a train for your mama, did you know that? Probably going to be your most embarrassing story when you're older, but I don't care. Best decision I ever made." They named him Henry Andrew O'Brien. Henry after Hannah's father and Andrew after Austin's. Little Henry was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and what promised to be his mother's stubborn determination. The ranch work became even more challenging with a baby, but they managed, taking turns so one of them could always be with Henry while the other worked. The years that followed were full of the ordinary struggles and joys that make up a life. They had good years and bad years, times of plenty and times of scarcity. Hannah miscarried a baby the year after Henry was born, and they grieved together, holding each other through the loss. But 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Grace Ann O'Brien, who looked exactly like Hannah and wrapped Austin around her tiny finger from day one. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Austin's reputation as a horseman spread, and he began to make good money breeding and training horses. They added rooms to the house, expanded their herd, hired help when they needed it. It wasn't wealth, but it was security, something neither of them had taken for granted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin surprised Hannah with a trip. They left the children with Margaret and Henry for a weekend and rode out to the spot where the train tracks ran through the desert, the place where their life together had truly begun. "You ever think about that day?" Austin asked as they stood beside the tracks, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. "Sometimes. I think about how close I came to leaving, to missing all of this." Hannah leaned against him, his arm coming around her waist automatically. "Do you think you really would have let me go if I'd chosen the train?" "I'd have tried to. If San Francisco was what you truly wanted, I'd have stepped aside." He kissed the top of her head. "But it would have destroyed me. You're the best part of me, Hannah. Everything good in my life started the day I stood on these tracks and told you I loved you. Everything good in my life started the day I decided to get off that train." They stood there for a long time, watching the desert stretch out around them, thinking about the life they'd built and the life still ahead. Eventually, a train appeared in the distance, its whistle cutting through the afternoon air. They watched it approach, watched it pass, the passengers inside probably never knowing that this spot, this seemingly empty stretch of desert, was where two people had chosen each other and changed the course of their lives. By the time their children were grown, the O'Brien Ranch was one of the most respected small operations in the territory. Henry followed in his father's footsteps, showing a natural talent for working with horses. Grace was more interested in the business side, keeping the books and negotiating deals with a sharp mind, and her mother's determination. They had 2 more children over the years, another son, Michael, and a surprise late baby, a daughter named Rose, who arrived when Hannah was 42 and Austin was 43. By then, they'd long since added that wraparound porch Austin had promised, along with several more rooms, a proper barn and outbuildings that housed their growing operation. Superior grew and changed over the years. The railroad that Austin had stopped became less central to the town's identity as automobiles became more common. The wild frontier days faded into memory and then into history. But through it all, the story of the cowboy who stopped the train for love remained, told and retold until it became part of local legend. On their 30th anniversary, the town of Superior threw them a party. Half the territory seemed to show up, wanting to celebrate the couple who'd become a symbol of true love and determination. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and more than one retelling of the famous train story, each version slightly more dramatic than the last. "They're saying you jumped in front of the train now," Hannah told Austin with amusement, watching the festivities from their place of honor. "That you grabbed onto the front and physically stopped it with your bare hands. Give it another 10 years and I'll have wrestled the train to the ground and carried you off over my shoulder." Austin's hair was gray now, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his blue eyes still sparkled with the same humor and love they'd always held. "Do you mind being part of a legend?" "I don't mind being part of our story," Hannah said, taking his hand. Her own hair was streaked with silver, her hands marked by years of hard work, but she'd never felt more beautiful than when Austin looked at her the way he was looking at her now. Legend, history, whatever people want to call it, what matters is that it's true. You stopped that train and I came back and we built this life together. Best decision I ever made. Best decision we ever made, Hannah corrected. It took both of us choosing each other every day. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them as the party continued into the evening. Henry had married a girl from town and had 3 children of his own. Grace had married a banker's son from Phoenix and had 2. Michael was courting the schoolteacher, much to everyone's amusement, since he'd once declared school a waste of time. And Rose, at 16, was already turning heads and breaking hearts, though she insisted she was too young to think about such things. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Austin pulled Hannah onto the makeshift dance floor for a waltz. They moved together with the ease of 3 decades of partnership, knowing each other's rhythms, anticipating each other's movements. "You remember the first time we danced?" Austin asked softly. "At our wedding. I remember you stepped on my toes 3 times. I was nervous. I had the most beautiful woman in Arizona in my arms and I didn't want to mess it up." "You didn't mess anything up, Austin. You never have." He held her closer, and they swayed to the music, surrounded by their family and friends, living proof that sometimes the most reckless decisions are the right ones. That sometimes love is worth stopping everything for. That sometimes the best life is the one you build together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment at a time. Years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. Arizona became a state in 1912, and Austin and Hannah marked the occasion by finally getting proper legal titles to their land, something that had been complicated in territorial days. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, the loss of friends and family members, the inevitable difficulties that come with aging. Henry took over most of the ranch operations as Austin's joints began to protest the hard physical labor. Grace managed the financial side, her sharp mind for numbers ensuring the ranch not only survived but thrived. Michael did marry the schoolteacher, and they had 4 children who spent their summers at the ranch, learning to ride and rope just as their parents had. Rose surprised everyone by going to college in Tucson, one of the first women from Superior to do so, though she came back every chance she got. On their 50th anniversary in 1933, during the depths of the Depression, their family gathered once again, this time at the ranch that had grown from Austin's modest 160 acres to a substantial operation spanning several hundred acres. Money was tight across the country, but the O'Briens had weathered harder times together. Austin was 71 now, his body marked by decades of hard work but his mind still sharp. Hannah was 70, her silver hair worn long down her back, her face lined but still beautiful to the man who'd loved her for more than half a century. They sat together on that wraparound porch he'd promised her so long ago, watching their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren play in the yard. 50 years, Hannah said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you stopped that train. Sometimes it feels like we've lived several lifetimes. Would you change anything? If you could go back, knowing everything that was coming, would you still get off that train? Hannah didn't hesitate. Every single time. Every version of my life that doesn't include you and this family and this life we built, that's the wrong version. She squeezed his hand, gnarled and calloused from a lifetime of work. What about you? Any regrets about the crazy cowboy who threw himself in front of a locomotive? My only regret is that I waited so long to do it, that I wasted years being afraid when I could have been loving you. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. But even with that, Even with all the struggles and hardships, Hannah, it's been a good life. The best life. The best life, she agreed, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their legacy play out before them. Austin passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1935, his hand clasped in Hannah's. He was 73 years old and had been complaining for weeks about being tired, but the doctor said his heart just gave out, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and full living. Hannah held him and told him she loved him, and even though he was gone, she felt certain he'd heard her. The funeral was the largest Superior had ever seen. People came from all over Arizona to pay their respects to the man who'd stopped a train for love, and then spent 50 years proving that love was enough to build a life on. The stories were told again, the dramatic stop, the declaration, the life that followed. But for Hannah and her children, it wasn't a legend. It was their life, their history, their father and husband who'd loved them all fiercely. Hannah lived another 8 years without Austin, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, never even considered it. She'd had her great love, her partner, her choice. Nothing could replace that or diminish it. She spent her final years on that porch Austin had built, telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the cowboy who'd stopped a train, the woman who'd chosen to stay, and the life they'd built together in the Arizona desert. When she passed in 1943, at the age of 80, her family buried her next to Austin in the Superior Cemetery, under a headstone that read, "Hannah Garrett O'Brien, beloved wife and mother worth stopping the world for." And beneath that, because she'd insisted on it in her will, she made the right choice. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The house was preserved, expanded, and modernized, but always keeping that original 2-room core that Austin had built with his own hands. The story of how it all began was told and retold, to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a family legend that was also absolute truth. Sometimes, even now, people in Superior will stand by those railroad tracks and imagine a young cowboy, desperate and determined, throwing himself in front of a locomotive for love. They'll imagine the woman who chose to get off the train, who chose an uncertain future with the man she loved over security and comfort. And they'll understand that the best love stories aren't about perfect people making perfect choices. They're about imperfect people making brave choices, and then doing the hard work of building a life together, day by day, year by year, until those choices become a legacy. The O'Brien Ranch still operates to this day, run by Austin and Hannah's descendants, a testament to what two people can build when they choose each other, when they're willing to stop the world, or at least a train, for love. And on quiet desert evenings, when the sun sets over the land they claimed and cultivated, locals swear you can sometimes hear the echo of a train whistle and a cowboy's voice declaring his love to the woman who made it all worthwhile. It was never just about stopping the train. It was about what came after, the choice to stay, the work to build something lasting, the love that sustained them through 5 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. It was about two people who found each other against the odds and then held on through everything, until the very end. And that, more than any dramatic gesture, is what made their story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through generations as an example of what love can be when it's tested and proven and lived out day after day. Not a fairy tale or a legend, though it became both, but a real life, fully lived, by two real people who chose each other and never looked back. The train kept running through Superior for decades after that famous stop, carrying passengers and freight through the Arizona desert. And every conductor, every engineer who worked that line, knew the story of the cowboy and the train. Some of them would slow down just slightly when they passed the O'Brien ranch, a small gesture of respect for the man who'd been crazy enough to stand on the tracks for love, and lucky enough that it had worked out. Because in the end, that's what made the story legendary. Not just the dramatic gesture, but the fact that it had worked. That the crazy cowboy and the woman who came back for him had built something real and lasting. That their love had been worth the risk, worth the sacrifice, worth everything they'd put into it over 50 years of marriage. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch, still tell the story, still understand that their entire existence stems from one moment of absolute courage, when a cowboy named Austin O'Brien saw the woman he loved about to leave his life forever, and decided to do something about it. When Hannah Garrett saw that same cowboy standing beside a stopped train, declaring his love, and decided that an uncertain future with him was better than any future without him. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Austin and Hannah O'Brien are together still, holding hands and watching over the legacy they built, the family they created, the love story that became legend. Still choosing each other, still grateful for that day when he stopped the train and she decided to stay, when they both chose love over fear and built a life that proved, beyond any doubt, that it had been the right choice all along.